Hello, and welcome to the course. I'm Stephen, your host for today, and I'm speaking with Professor Malte Willer. Professor Willer's main area of interest is the philosophy of language and philosophical logic, specifically the dynamic perspective on discourse and reasoning. He holds a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin, and in 2016, he was a recipient of the Llewellyn John and Harriet Manchester Quantrell Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching. He's here today to talk to us about his career and how he became a University of Chicago professor. Professor Willer, thank you so much for joining us on the course today. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you. We have a lot to get into, but let's just start off with some of the basics. So could you just tell our listeners, what your current role is at U Chicago, and in layman's terms, how is it that you describe what you do and what you study?
Yeah, so I'm associate professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago. That involves teaching, research, and of course also helping keep the university running. My primary area of interest is just at a very general level, our ability to communicate, and specifically our ability to share information using words. So when you're wondering about Mary's whereabouts, and I'm telling you that she's in Chicago, there's something that I said and that you understood, right? And you also understand that the information I just gave you is subtly or maybe even radically different from what I would have communicated if instead I had said, like, Mary might be in Chicago, or she must be in Chicago, or if she is in Chicago, if Johnny is, So that is basic competence in communicating and understanding what has been communicated. That is a fascinating ability of us. I mean, some people are inclined to think that's the kind of, ability that distinguishes us from everything else out there. And there are various questions that you can ask about this phenomenon. So the one that I'm focusing on is the one that is actually also studied by theoretical linguists, or at least certain theoretical linguists, namely, how should we think about the linguistic information that I just shared with you? And in particular, how should we model this information using the tools and techniques that have been provided by logic and mathematics? And there are various reasons why you might be interested in this specific task. Originally, philosophers were interested in this task, or are still interested in this task, because they think that, giving this kind of careful information to language and its structure and, what is communicated really helps us resolve, philosophical problems. And there the basic thought is just that, look, philosophy and philosophical thinking is done using language. So in order to understand what we're doing when we're doing philosophy and, and understanding the philosophical problems that we try to resolve, we better pay a lot of careful attention to the main tools that we're using in, doing philosophy, namely language. So that's, I think, how people got into this originally. But you can also easily see, and I think hopefully everybody can see why you would be interested in this, for example, from an AI perspective, artificial intelligence perspective, right? Because, you would certainly think that, if you want to make progress toward artificial intelligence, what you would want to do is to somehow model our ability one of our most important abilities, namely to communicate, right? And when you are able to model the information that is communicated, linguistic information, using the tools of mathematics and logic, then, that is going to help you substantially. You might even think that it's a prerequisite for making ultimately a artificial system the ability to communicate intelligently with human agents. So that's, I think, about the significance of the project. And then just a little additional bit, then no one can, this is like such a rich field that you have to specialize in certain kind of phenomena. So, just from the empirical side, then I'm interested in particular in modal information, our ability to communicate not about what is the case, but about what might be the case or must be the case or ought to be the case, or can be the case, whatever you want to. So, like the modal expressions, and I'm interested in how to think about that information. And I'm also then interested in kind of subjective information. I mean, the simple fact that some of the judgments we communicate seem to be subjective and others seem to be more objective. So, to think that Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system, that seems to be like, an objective question. That Jupiter is the most beautiful planet in the solar system, that seems to be like a subjective matter, right? And, the question is, well, I mean, that is something that we all understand, but, at the level, I mean, like at the level of analysis, and the question is, well, how do we actually want to capture these kind of differences? And what is it actually to understand a certain bit of information as subjective as opposed to objective? So that's kind of from the empirical side. And then you have very interesting conversations in philosophy about, okay, what is the best theoretical framework, as it were, to address these kind of questions? And here I'm then interested in alternatives to the standard approach that you have in the tradition here, where information was mostly thought about as representational. So what makes information is that it represents the world to be a certain way, and so there are certain ways for information to be correct, and then if things turn out otherwise, it's going to be incorrect. And I then just have a interestingly different approach that I favor, which is more about focusing on our ability as speakers to coordinate rational activities. And then you can get down the rabbit hole about various kinds of, how these kind of technical differences really give you different kind of outputs at the empirical level.
Interesting. And you raised a couple of things that I want to talk about as this conversation progresses. But before we get too deep into the weeds, I wanted to pull back and ask you a little bit about how you got into this and just sort of your route to academia. So going way back, could you describe yourself? What were you like? What were your interests when you were maybe the equivalent of like American middle or high school age? And were there any signs at that point that you were going to end up in this field?
I was certainly like a average high school student, in the sense that, well, I don't know, most of my interests were outside of high school.
Yeah.
I really, owe a lot of this, for better or worse, to, some of my teachers, or one teacher in particular, like who really motivated me to, like think about certain kind of philosophical issues. The way I got exposed to it first was actually like in, the analog of an English class. I mean, it was German, and,
Right.
you read a lot of German literature, classical German literature, where there's a lot of philosophy happening. And, I got a lot of encouragement from, my high school teacher back in the days to, reflect critically on the issues that had been raised by these great past German authors. And I think it was then, I got very hooked on these kind of, classical philosophical questions through that path. And one thing that is maybe relevant background, which is a peculiarity of the German university system, or definitely different from what you have in the States, is that in Germany, if you want to go to university, you already have to decide on a major.
Right.
So you're enrolling for a certain kind of study. So it's not that, you do 2 years of, I don't know, general education, and you maybe take some physics classes or what have you, and then end up deciding, oh, I want to be an English major. That's not how it works. You have to sign up very early on, as it were, for a certain kind of major. And I think it was already pretty clear when I was like 16, 17, that I wanted to study philosophy.
Gotcha. So can you walk us through your steps from there to where you are now? Like what institutions did you attend, degrees, and sort of how did your interests evolve as you passed from that age to where you are now?
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So I started studying philosophy, logic, and theory of science at the University of Munich. Yeah. So as you can see, none of these have practical implications. So it was, the perfect preparation for being a cab driver. I mean, that's what they say in Germany.
Yeah.
It was actually like like an interesting fact about this, that this was kind of a reformed course of like studies. So they were like, back in the days, they were experimenting with new kind of formats for higher education. Normally in Germany, what you do when you go to university is that you have these big lectures, and then there's maybe an exam towards the end of the semester. And maybe there are seminars where you stay silent for most of the time, and then you write some kind of like little thesis, 20 pages towards the end of the seminar to just get your credit. This was actually like more inspired by the Oxford system, where you would actually like have very close interactions with professors,
Right.
or like with professional academics, and you would write a lot of papers and discuss them with your peers and with the professors. So that was kind of a new thing. So I did that. Then I had like a year abroad at Oxford University at St. Catherine's College, where I was a visiting undergraduate student. And then in my fourth year, returned to Munich to basically wrap up my undergraduate degree. And then I moved to the University of Texas at Austin to do my PhD in philosophy. It took me 5 years, so I think that's pretty fast for philosophy. I mean, like for the humanities in general, and for philosophy. But it was possible here. Like maybe like a fun anecdote is that I asked my supervisor towards the end of year 4 whether I should try going on the job market, and he said, "Well, is there anything really interesting going to happen within another year?" Right? And I said, "I don't think so." Then he said, "Well, then you're ready to go on the job market." So that was the gist of his advice there, as it were. But yeah, I mean, it worked out then, and so I just got the job offered at the University of Chicago straight out of a PhD program, which is also like something that is becoming, I mean, it's unheard of in many fields. I mean, I think in the sciences it's pretty unheard of. You first have to do like a few rounds of postdocs, I guess. In philosophy, there is still like something like that happening, that people just get hired out of grad school if they're somehow deemed remarkable enough. But certainly we do have in philosophy also like a trend more towards postdocs, that you have to do at least one postdoc before you get your permanent position. But anyway, so since 2010 I've been then at the University of Chicago.
Well, looking back, I guess at your, you had a variety of undergraduate experiences, and then your experience in Texas as well. Like, who are one or two people who stick out to you as people who provided you with a lot of support through that? Like, who do you sort of credit with helping you reach this point?
Yeah, I mean, like at the University of Munich, I can certainly credit at least like one professor who was very supportive when it came to my writing my undergraduate thesis, or my MA thesis, and who also like you need recommendation letters. For example, he was able and willing to write like a recommendation letter for graduate school on a very short notice. He gave me a lot of feedback. He supported me in all kinds of ways. So that was Johannes Hübner, who is now like professor at Universität Halle an der Saale. And so I think at UT Austin, I can definitely think of a number of professors who provided me in various ways. And I think that's kind of important, actually, to just know that people are good at different things, and they may be able to support you in one area, maybe not so much in another area. Yeah. So I think, a lot of support from different kind of sources. I mean, also sometimes emotional support, but also, like the kind of support with my work. And there I would definitely credit both of my PhD supervisors. So I basically had two, Josh Dever and Nick Asher. who supported me there a lot. But there are also other people at the University of Texas at Austin who were just really able to spend a lot of time with me, talking through philosophical problems, being available, sometimes in ways that I find nowadays very hard to just mirror, as it were. I mean, despite my best intentions. So definitely, the old crowd of philosophers of language there, Mark Sainsbury, Hans Kamp, also linguists like David Beaver, just, really, really supported me extensively there. And there were a lot of other people that I learned just a
You said that you applied for jobs when you did, and obviously worked out. I also know that you are a big proponent of having a backup plan. So yeah. Can you walk me through? Was there a moment when you decided I definitely want to go for this, or was there a specific reason that you decided, yes, I do want to be an academic? And also, how did you prepare for the possibility that you might not become one?
Yeah, great. So I think that, like I'm one of the things that I've done at in the philosophy department is that for some time I was director of placement, thinking, helping people prepare for the job market. And I think it is just, really important to ask yourself, ideally before you go to graduate school, am I really willing to live with the consequences? And the consequences are, and even if you get a job, right, it might not be in a place where you want to live. That is just something one really needs to be prepared for. And I think it is an answer. It's a question that it's easier to answer when you're, let's say, 25 or 22 than when you're 30, because things change, life changes, and I think one really has to be aware of what one is getting into. So the way that I always dealt with these kind of anxiety was actually to, work actively on a alternative to an academic career that I could be happy with. And in my case, this was, flirting with management consulting, like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, these kind of things. There are I think there are interesting differences between, management consulting in the US and Europe. So I was mostly focused on the one in Europe. So how did I prepare for that? Well, I think, every plan B needs to be credible. And that means, potential employers need to see that this is something like a realistic option for you, and not just, they might know that it's a plan B, but they shouldn't feel like they are plan B. And so I think you need to prepare for that in an adequate fashion, especially if you're playing with the humanities. So what I did was to actually study. Actually, already when I was an undergraduate, I enrolled in a long distance university, which is, has a very good reputation in Germany, Fernuniversität Hagen. That was the only one back in the days. They would actually send you, like folders of material that you would have to study, and then you had to do little tests and you had to send them back. It was actually quite a lot of going to the post office back in the days. I'm not sure how they do it these days.
Yeah.
But so I at least got, some credit there, so that I was, like a plausible candidate. And then actually, while I was doing my PhD, I did a 3-month internship over the summer at one of the large management consulting firms. And I actually ended up with an offer from them after, this kind of testing phase. That's how they do recruiting, I guess, in that field. So when I was actually going on the job market, I already had like this offer from the consulting group, from the Boston Consulting Group, in my pocket. And so I was then able to basically see, well, let's see what comes out of it. And if I get offers, well, then I can compare, as it were, between, what I want to do. And I got to say, until this point, it was not an easy decision to make between the University of Chicago and, the management consulting position. And at the end of the day, I just, felt like, well, this is ultimately what I had been preparing for almost a decade of my life. So I decided then to, just go with the academic career path. But it was just, an immense luxury that, I worked pretty hard for, but it's still a luxury to just have these kind of two different paths laid out in front of me and be able to decide. And I think that's a lot of what freedom amounts to.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean, that certainly is a great position to be in. I'm curious what you would say to people who are, hoping to follow in your footsteps and end up, in a position like yours. I mean, I think, I'm certainly hearing you say have, a fallback. Is there any other advice that you think it would be important for them to hear?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me just, put two pieces of advice out there. The one is a little bit demanding, and the other one is maybe also a little bit encouraging. I mean, one thing that is important to realize is that an academic career is like is a professional career, and so some of the advice that you would get if you were like in the industry also apply to academia. And one of them, for example, is that you always have to perform at the one level higher than what you actually are in order to get promoted. So if you are in graduate school, you are a PhD student, right? But you should actually perform like you're a professional. And that involves, I think, doing what academic professionals are doing, trying to publish, going to conferences, and all of these and be involved in the academic community of your university or something like that. So you're actually, like, in a very important sense, no longer a student, and or at least you shouldn't behave like one. So I think that is just very important to keep in mind, to just stand out among many of the candidates that are ultimately trying out the job market every year. But the other one, I think another thing that is especially in philosophy of relevance is that it is very, very easy to be intimidated by peers. I mean, especially in philosophy, where even though it has changed a lot, there is still there's still kind of performative aspect to it. How quick are you? How eloquent are you? Are you deemed a genius, or that person is really smart, and then there are the rest of the mortals out there who are dabbling in philosophy, but that person is a genius. So there's still a lot of that in philosophy, and I can honestly say that when I went to graduate school, I mean, I was just hellishly impressed by the eloquence of the people who were in my cohort, and I was really feeling like, oh my God, I mean, like, how am I supposed to? If just like a third of these get a job, I mean, how am I even going to go into the top 1/3? I mean, it just. And at the end of the day, I think this is the important thing: is that nothing beats hard work. I mean, not to suggest that they didn't work hard either. Or I mean, actually, like, our cohort did very good on. I think everybody found happiness. But I think that it's just important to keep in mind that in academia, as actually, like, probably in most of the industry, like, nothing beats hard work. And even though it's very easy to think that one is not as smart or as quick as the others, in general, one is. And if there are any interesting differences, they just diminish over time as a consequence of hard work.
You referenced some of the non-teaching, non-research aspects of your work, and sort of, I think you said, just keeping the university running. Is that something that you enjoy, or do you find it to be more of like a distraction from the other things you do as a professor?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I do think I enjoy it, though there are many aspects of it that are quite annoying. I mean, like, I think that it's very important, for example, for like, that there's some basic accountability. But if accountability amounts to filling in tons and tons of forms and ticking boxes and so on, I think this is certainly not why I joined academia. But I think that at the University of Chicago, at least, a lot of the service is actually ultimately involves some intellectual activity. So, for example, if you're helping on a searching panel, like, fulfill certain kind of positions in the department, obviously, but also maybe at the college level, you're just spending some time, like, engaging with very interesting work, maybe even work not in your field, and you're normally working with, I mean, it's still amazing that, at the University of Chicago with other departments, you're still working with people who are very, very smart and who are also, like, I think, very interested and also actually most of the time very kind. So I think it is actually like ultimately a rewarding experience. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's an honest but a positive response to that. I'm glad to hear it. I had two questions to wrap up on. I mean, one, I'm just curious, given the fact that you came into the American system from abroad and that you also experienced a little bit of the British system as well. How do you think that's affected your work and your sort of evolution as an academic? I mean, do you think that's had a big effect or not so much?
Yeah, no, I think, well, I mean, definitely, I think that the PhD education, I mean, particularly in the States, in particular in the humanities, compares very, very favorably to what we have, for example, in the German system or in the UK system. So I benefited just a lot from the PhD education that you get in the in the United States. But I think I think I got kind of the best of both worlds, because I feel like that, the German undergraduate system also has a lot of really, really good aspects, because you can focus very early on, you get very serious education. It is all public. So and it's actually like, I mean, you don't have any college debt, for example. That's, liberating. That makes a difference for whether you want to do a PhD or not. And it's very serious. So, I mean, I think that I really benefited from both of the systems.
Glad to hear that. Just as we wrap up, the last question that we've been asking everyone is, what is the most gratifying thing about your current job?
Well, the most gratifying thing about my current job is that, it's actually why you do this job. I mean, that, you have the ability and you have the time to think about problems seriously. And maybe like to add to that, you can discuss these kind of problems with really, really smart, intelligent, and kind people. And that involves, I should add, not only my colleagues, but also, the students. So I think that maybe just to summarize it a little bit, the most gratifying thing about this job is that you can do your job, including teaching, including service, as I mentioned, and grow intellectually. Come from work and actually have your batteries recharged, as opposed to worn out. And I think this is just a tremendous gift.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean, like the distinction between recharging and getting worn out?
Yeah, I mean, like when I come home from work, so I mean, just when I was working in management consulting, right? Sunday afternoon, you had the afternoon blues because you were thinking, oh God, I have to get to work and things like that.
Yep.
When on Friday you were exhausted, right? And I think that, sometimes you're exhausted too, but there are days where you feel after a day of work and, teaching students and doing research with your collaborators or with your colleagues, you actually feel refreshed. You feel better than how you felt when you came into work. And that's what I mean with recharging the batteries. I mean, it is really like, it's really a nourishing activity, or at least it can be. And I think in my case, it's like at least, 75% of the time. And I'm immensely grateful for that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And yeah, I mean, that's wonderful to hear. We should all be so lucky to feel that way.
Yes. No, I think that should be a human right. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree. And just to editorialize a little bit, I do feel that way talking with you and your colleagues, because it's always interesting. You always have good advice for people who may want to enter your field, but also I think just an interesting outlook on work in general and your work life. So Professor Willer, thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's been great speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you, Professor Willer, for your time today. And course takers, if you enjoyed listening to today's interview, please check out the other ones. Leave us a comment, subscribe, follow, and share this episode with your friends and family. You can find out more about the University of Chicago through uchicago.edu or the university's campus in Hong Kong through uchicago.hk. Stay tuned for more. See you around.